Well, the beat continues right here on Morning Live. Gwen Ansell is the author of South African cultural history book Soweto Blues and is one of South Africa's leading jazz scholars, journalists and educators. We picked her brain about Ntate Johnny Mekoa and asked about the trumpeter's legacy in the South African jazz scene.
We're talking about a ferociously talented trumpeter, and you know, much as I appreciate the huge contribution he made to education and other things, the fact is, before any of that, he was one hell of a good trumpeter. He had a very distinctive sound, he took thoughtful solos, he had technique, even before he went to study overseas. Great player though he was the person who actually has created so many names. I mean, we have, and I won't name them, but a lot of very distinguished jazz musicians in this country who at one time or another have said, I'm starting a music school. And some of them have, and some of them haven't been able to raise the funds. Very few of them have produced as many working professional musicians as Johnny's school did. You have stars like Malcolm Gianni, Oscar Rachabane, Mthunzi Mvubu. You have school teachers, lots and lots of school music teachers who got their start with Johnny. You also have the fact that unlike some other people in the industry, Johnny never drew lines around what women at his school could do. So you have some very powerful female saxophonists like Linda Shabalala also coming out of that school. I think in many ways, lots of people said it, I want to educate kids, I want to start a music school. Johnny did it, but also we have the products, and those products are themselves now playing, mentoring younger musicians, taking that forward. So I think that legacy is tremendous. I don't think you can underestimate it. The Jazz Ministers was formed by Johnny Mekoa, the saxophonist Aubrey Simani, and a bunch of others. Basically, the East Rand, Benoni, that area, was already rich with bands, but at the time the Ministers were formed, the opportunities to play were kind of closing down, and in a sense almost you had your own band, you made your own gigs. So there was a real importance there. And then, because their piano player, Boy Ngwenya, had actually worked in a band that had won a prize at the Coldcastle Jazz Festival, a band called, a close harmony vocal group called the Woody Woodpeckers. I believe it was Boy Ngwenya who pulled in Victor Ndlaziwane, who was the making of the Jazz Ministers, because as well as the fact that they were all already really accomplished players, Victor was also a stunning singer and arranger. And that gave the Jazz Ministers a bit of an edge, which I think got them noticed a lot. And Johnny himself also says that. And of course, the great thing about Ntate Johnny was he was a very physically imposing figure. You couldn't miss him. He was tall, he was broad, he had a gigantic steel grey afro. He just sort of occupied a bandstand when he stood up. But then you listened, and actually, wow, he was one hell of a good player as well. And then, of course, I interviewed him extensively for the radio series Ubuyile, which formed the basis for my book, Soweto Blues. And you realize the man also had an incredibly sharp memory and a fund of good stories and a really astute analysis of the circumstances he was living and trying to work in. And that also made him a very memorable person. Yeah. And a great sense of humor, I think it also has to be said. The one I remember is the one that everyone remembers because it's such a remarkable story, and that's the story of what happened in New York. They finally got to New York after multiple hassles with visas. And I suspect, although Johnny was very, very modest about it, that he had been very politically outspoken in his community because it took him 4 goes to get a visa when other band members had got them more easily. So it was the 4th year they were invited that they actually got to Newport. And it was bicentennial year. So as well as playing Newport, they actually played a number of clubs and other events. And a South African warship, the Paul Kruger, was in town, in the country, also for the bicentennial celebrations, and it was suggested that they play on the deck of the Paul Kruger. And of course, no, said Johnny, no, we couldn't do that. And of course they got pulled in by the SB when they got home and were interrogated, and I think the authorities were keeping an eye on most of them after that. But I think for me that's a very memorable story. because they all knew. They knew very well what was going to happen when they got home, and they nevertheless had the principle to stick with that and say, no, we cannot play on the warship of the oppressor's army.
South Africa is mourning the death of legendary jazz trumpeter and music educator Ntate Johnny Mekoa, who died on Monday afternoon. We are paying a tribute to him today.